Washington's clear-thinking headquarters. The Morning Majority, 5 to 9 on 630 WMAL.
8:07 on WMAL. Brian Neiman, Tony Blankley this morning on the Morning Majority. Michael Barone joins us now, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner. You see him on Fox all the time as well. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Well, we've been talking about Mitch Daniels decided not to run. Donald Trump's not running. Mike Huckabee's not running. But still, people believe that there's going to be another person or persons entering the race still to come for the Republican side. I'm just curious as to when the timeline is for someone to finally get into the race. Is it the end of the summer, or can somebody even wait till, say Thanksgiving, Christmas time?
Well, Bill Clinton didn't formally enter the race for president in the cycle of 20 years ago until October 1981. And so I suppose the answer is that, you could wait until the New Hampshire filing deadline, or if you wanted to wait until you wanted to skip New Hampshire, you could wait until even later than that. So it's theoretically possible for something to happen. Conventional wisdom is that it's not going to, because you have to, get into the race early if you want to really compete. I think a lot of things are possible, and wouldn't totally rule that out. I mean, there's nothing that says that somebody can't be nominated at the convention who hasn't spent months and months and months in Iowa and New Hampshire.
One wonders sometimes, Michael, whether all the rules we have, in politics, you can't do this, you have fundraising, maybe events and technology is changing in such a way that pretty soon these will be silly rules. Perhaps you could enter in New Hampshire in early January and saturate the media if you've got something to sell. I mean, like a Chris Christie or something, and all of the requirement to hire the best operatives and raise the money for the advertising you could swamp it. Don't you think that's we tend to sort of be backward looking in our strategic rules? Well,
we're backward looking, and we're saying something has never happened. Well, the number of times that we've had predominantly presidential primaries determining the nomination is exactly 10, as I count it, going back to the 1970s.
Yeah.
10 is not a sample size from which you can draw any conclusions in a public opinion poll. It's a pretty slim number.
Oh, that's right. You were a pollster before you got into this current record.
Covering pollster.
Yeah,
congratulations.
So you know the math on this stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, the fact is that 10 instances is not is not really enough to justify a statistical inference.
That's a good point.
That people are always saying, well, the Republicans go for the next guy in line. Well, there are actually, I think, 5 instances where they've done that. That's not persuasive that it can't happen.
You wrote a piece recently that said Obama channels George W. Bush, obviously, except on Israel and the Palestinians. Explain your thinking there.
Well, if you read the first 3 quarters of his speech last Thursday on the Middle East, which he felt obliged to give for whatever reasons, he's talking about freedom and democracy and encouraging, and in this way, a lot of it could have been taken straight from Bush. Of course, Obama said this is the first time America's ever done this. All our previous presidents coddled the dictators. Well, Bush said the same thing in some of his speeches, and in fact did change his policy, not completely. America still pays some attention to realpolitik and so forth in the Middle East, and will continue to do so under Obama. And in some puzzling ways. Why are we, in some ways fighting in Libya and saying that Assad has a good chance to be a real reformer in Syria? That doesn't seem to be very consistent, but the fact is that a lot of it sounded just like Bush. And remember, the sophisticated people, the liberals, were all saying when Bush was talking about freedom and democracy, isn't he a foolish Texas cowboy?
Yeah.
He doesn't understand the nuances of things in the world, and they scoffed and laughed at him. And now Obama is finding himself saying the same thing because, in fact, it's in the interest of the United States.
I know this is a hypothetical and we'll never be able to prove it one way or the other, but how would George W. Bush have handled Egypt? Would he have supported Mubarak, or would he have called for him to step down?
Well, I think you can find precedent in George W. Bush for him doing both of those things. I mean, in his first term and some distance into his second term, he was pretty tough on Egypt, and they were talking about withdrawing aid and so forth. In the last 3 years of his administration, much less so. So, unclear. And I think if you ask Bush himself, he wouldn't be able to tell you an answer, even if he was inclined to be frank about it.
So is it possible that the Bush appointees on foreign policy might say that, given his speech regarding the freedom agenda, for the first point in their adult life, they're proud of President Obama?
For the
Not when it comes to Israel, I would say, right?
No. I mean, regarding the peace, the democracy agenda of the
part,
president.
yeah.
I was attempting to be vaguely amusing.
Yeah.
I understood it. I was talking about Michelle Obama's. Yeah. Okay, I got it. Can you make heads or tails out of the president's decision to bring in the 67 borders into play on Israel, on why he did it?
To bring it in the way that he did, and in fact, just to bring up the whole issue of Israel and the Palestinians, he says that the situation today is unsustainable. I'm not sure why that's true. It's been sustained for a very long period of time now. An awful lot longer than Europe between World War I and World War II, and he says that we have to, that people are demanding a solution now. Well, actually, one of the interesting things is that as one listens to and tries to understand the Arab Spring people that are demanding change in their governments, they're not interested in Israel and the Palestinians. It seems that perhaps they understand that the dictators there have been using the plight of the Palestinians as something to divert them from the actual conditions these people themselves have to live in their own countries. And they're not, Israel and Palestine are not the central demand. They're not the central preoccupation of Al-Qaeda and the happily late Osama bin Laden.
That's a good point. I mean, the people rising in the streets or protesting streets in Egypt and Bahrain and Syria, I don't see them caring at all about the Palestinian state at all.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that Obama says that Israel obviously doesn't want to negotiate with Hamas, which denies Israel's right to exist, and Obama acknowledges that in his speech last Thursday and then in his AIPAC speech this week. And he says, yeah, but Israel's got to negotiate with them anyway, just as soon as can be. Does not compute. There's something wrong there. So I think it's the very fact that he brought this subject up was an attempt to put pressure on Israel, or to be seen as putting pressure on Israel, at a time when I don't think that the exigencies of events required him to do that.
Michael, let me ask you on this point. The president chose to bring up the question of peace negotiations must go on. Do you see any evidence that he and his administration are planning to try to make that operational? I mean, they've just lost Mitchell, the peace envoy. Do you see evidence that it's sort of at a bureaucratic operational level they're going to do anything, or have they just sort of thrown this out as a word thought?
Well, I think to the contrary. I think this is one of the least propitious times for these negotiations to have occurred in the last 25, 30 years, because Israel plainly lacks a negotiating partner. Part of that is Barack Obama's fault. His demand 2 years ago that Israel stop, quote, settlements, unquote, which includes refurbishing a house in West Jerusalem, an area that's always been part of Israel, meant that the Palestinians had to demand at least that in order to have any standing. They couldn't be in a position of demanding less than the American president did. And Israel wasn't going to do that, so end of negotiations. Then you have the merger of Fatah and Hamas 2 weeks ago, or whenever it was, very recently. And, Israel is obviously not going to negotiate with Hamas, which, denies Israel's right to existence. So I can't imagine a less propitious moment for these negotiations to take place. I can't imagine a time where Israel could afford to enter into a settlement with these people. There simply is not an interlocutor. And to demand these things at this time is to put pressure on Israel to do something that Israel, under no circumstances, will ever do.
Yep. All right, Michael. Good to talk to you as always. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Michael Barone, senior political analyst, The Washington Examiner, here on